Did they just find a real-life vampire in Poland? Let's look into it. What's up guys, I'm Adam, and as always, welcome to the channel. Today I have a super cool story for you. Just recently in Poland, they were doing an archaeological dig in a 17th century graveyard, and they came across the skeleton of what they think is a female vampire. The reason they think this is because the way the skeleton was found. There was a sickle across the neck, and there was also a padlock around the big toe. And this is reminiscent of the way they would bury would-be vampires back in the 17th century, because this was a real issue for them. The sickle would take off the head if this creature were to arise from the night, and that padlock would keep them shackled to the ground. This was one of many ways in which they would incapacitate would-be vampires. Skeletons throughout the area had been found with spikes in the skull or rocks in the mouth, and they've even been found buried upside down with the sickle still across the neck. And in some cases, they even found the skull between the legs, and this was so that if the vampire were to arise from the dead, they couldn't find their head as easily. So, why did they think that these vampires were real things? Well, let's get into some of the origins of how vampires came about. Vampire lore can be traced all the way back to ancient times. Tales of bloodsuckers, of demons, and creatures who feasted upon flesh were common themes throughout certain parts of the world. In Greek writings, you'll find that consuming blood was a way for the dead to communicate with the living world. Spirits and cadavers didn't possess the power to make contact with the undead. However, if they were to get a taste of that bloody goodness from the living, they could regain certain abilities lost in death. In Slavic Europe, vampire lore was profound. One of the earliest recordings was a tale of a 14th century shepherd named Mislata. This shepherd died and was buried as custom, but he didn't want to stay in the ground. At night, this figure would awake, creep around the town as if he were alive, and scare people. Shortly after, he began killing people and terrorizing the population at large. It was even stated that if you were unfortunate enough to get a visit from him at your home, and he called out your name, you would die days after. After a while, the villagers, living in constant fear, decided to take action. They exhumed the body and set it on fire. The vampire puffed and roared and let out a terrible sound. One of the villagers grabbed a wooden stick and shoved it into him. Blood came pouring out. Eventually, Mislata was dead. Quickly after, the terror stopped. These tales spread throughout Europe for hundreds of years. Eventually, we arrived at the version we mostly see vampires described as today. Bram Stoker's Dracula was the catalyst to these descriptions. However, Bram's own tale of the notorious vampire was said to be inspired indirectly by a real-life ruler named Vlad III, or by his more infamous names, Vlad the Impaler and Vlad Dracula. Vlad was a 15th century Romanian ruler who was infamous for his cruel displays of punishment, mainly impalement. He would have enemies, local criminals, and dissenters impaled by large wooden spheres. The process was excruciating and oftentimes done in a way that wouldn't initially kill the person. The individuals who were impaled would then be hoisted up and displayed around the town, where they would die a slow and agonizing death. It was even said that Vlad, who had a thirst for blood, enjoyed dining among the corpses. Although a sadistic tactic, this vision kept many criminals off the streets in fear of having it done to them. These displays also later made Vlad a national hero of Romania because of his efforts fighting for the independence of Romanian land. During warring years, the Ottoman forces looking to invade and take over Romania eventually entered into the area of impalements. To their amazement, it was said that there was some 20,000 people split and raised up on display. You could imagine how this must have looked and smelled. The army and Sultan, in disbelief, ended their campaign and left. Vlad Dracula's brutality became legend and was spread throughout the regions. Because of his actions, and his name being synonymous with the Dracula of today, Transylvania, the region in which Vlad inhabited, has been the location for modern vampire lore. So we can see that the idea of vampires had been around throughout the ages. Many cultures in Europe believed in the concept behind vampires, but their depictions weren't always the same. Was the skeleton found in Poland a real-life vampire? Well, probably not in the sense that we view vampires today, but to the people of that time, she absolutely was. In those days, there wasn't much science and explanation behind things, so people with certain diseases or who were born with certain birth defects could be seen as evil. It was said that babies born with teeth or individuals who had a unibrow could eventually go on to become vampires. The skeleton found in Poland was most likely an individual who was different from the group, probably in one of the ways I just described. However, there could be more to the tale, and the old world really did experience the wrath of the undead. Well, that's gonna do it. If you guys enjoy these stories and would like to help me out, if you could please smash that like button and think about subscribing, I would super appreciate it. Until the next one, guys, take care.